We're back in our familiar digs, and in a year of sequels, it's time to review the first sequel on this channel, Justin, Library Chess Productions, coming at you with another movie review. This time, this sequel from Broken Lizard to the Broken Lizard movie. We're going to be reviewing Jay Chandrasekhar's Super Troopers 2. Super Troopers 2 is a comedic crime mystery starring the ensemble troupe that is known as the Broken Lizard, Jay Chandrasekhar, Kevin Heffernan, and the list goes on and on and on, as well as some notable cameo appearances, most notably Will Sasso. In Super Troopers 2, Thorny Mac and the whole gang are recruited back into the Vermont Highway Patrol in order to assist with the transition of a disputed Canadian-American border town. They're phasing out a Mountie unit in order to take over the town, which is technically on Vermont soil. While there, the guys stumble upon yet another underground drug ring and are determined to bust it up. This is probably one of the tougher movies for me to review with any kind of objectivity. And even though movies are subjective, we try to approach them, if we're going to bother to do a review that other people might consume, you try to approach them from at least something of an objective perspective. And that is difficult for me because Super Troopers, that original Super Troopers, holds such a special place to me as a movie watcher, as a fan of comedy. Like, that movie came along at just the right time and completely blew my hair back with how funny it was. So this is a difficult one for me to review. And not that I didn't want to see a sequel, because I definitely did. It's just difficult for me to be objective. But one of those things that always helps me, and hopefully it's an idea that helps you too, is, hey, dude, this doesn't have to be the original one to be good. And I think that's something we have to consistently remind ourselves of when we're watching sequels. And this year especially is just sequelitis. It's so many sequels this year and continuations of franchises and things like that. There's so many of them that it's important to remind ourselves, I think, periodically, this doesn't have to be the original one. Like, if you love the original one and then now there's a sequel coming out, it doesn't have to be that movie to be good. In addition to both co-writing and co-starring in the movie, Jay Chandrasekhar, who plays Thorny, is also the director. Now, Chandrasekhar doesn't have to be Stanley Kubrick, Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola. Like, he doesn't have to be these directors. Speaking of things that one doesn't have to be versus the other, he doesn't have to be like this great director. But I couldn't help but notice as I'm watching the movie, this movie looks exactly the same as the first one. Worth pointing out at this point, since this is the internet, I didn't exactly want this movie to look like Ready Player One. I didn't want it to be some big visual feast, but I also would have expected that in 16 years, maybe something about the way you make movies might have changed, whether the way you frame shots or even just the base quality of the image. It basically looks like the exact same movie 16 years apart. And that's not even really a criticism, I guess. It's just I'm watching the movie and I couldn't help but note that, like, if you would have told me this movie was made in 2004, I would have believed you. Because that's just the way it looks. It just looks like the exact same movie. Maybe that's a feature. I'm not necessarily using it as a criticism. Just something I made note of. Super Troopers 2 relies heavily on what I like to call Can-Am humor. So basically what that is most of the people in the cast are American. So you're talking about Americans making fun of Canada, and it's also Americans playing Canadians making fun of Americans. That's what I mean by Can-Am humor. So the movie relies a ton on that, and that kind of comedy actually works for me. So I found this movie actually pretty funny. So if that kind of humor doesn't really work for you, you're probably going to struggle to find a place with this movie. But it did actually really, really work for me in a lot of places. I was laughing pretty consistently. Also, I mean, how can you not love seeing these characters again? Like, seeing Thorny kind of go on this weird kind of drug trip, and just Mac and Farva, and these are actually interesting characters It's funny to say that about, the guys from Super Troopers, but they're actually kind of interesting characters. So it was just so nice to be able to see these characters again in this style of movie, just to kind of get more Super Troopers magic on the big screen. Was excellent to see, and I was so happy to be able to step back into this world and see these characters again. Kind of sucks that it took an Indiegogo campaign for it to happen, but it happened, and that's what matters. So just to see these characters again, it was awesome for me. This movie's good. This movie's funny. And that's about all that I can say about it. Perfectly honest, I'd be lying if I said it was anything more. And maybe it doesn't need to be anything more. But remember, for me, Super Troopers is... I'm sitting here fighting that ugly, terrible, man, we waited 16 years for this feeling. And that's on me. That's my problem. But that's why you've come to watch this review, to know what I think about it. So that's what I think about it. I'm sitting here fighting that, man, I love that first movie. It's been 16 years, and I finally get to see another one. And I waited 16 years for that. And it was good, and it was funny. But that's it. And that's not even me being disappointed. I think a lot of people will sort of co-opt that with feelings of disappointment. I'm not disappointed in that, as if the screen is behind me here or something. I'm not disappointed in that movie. But I did dare to dream and aspire for something more that, I have to be honest with you, I didn't get. Super Troopers 2? And you have no idea how that pains me to only give the sequel to one of my favorite comedies of all time an It would be like me watching Clerks 2 and at the end of that movie being like, I want to give it the business. I want to give it the business so bad. I'm jonesing to give this movie the business. But if I'm going to be objective here, I can't do it. Here's what I will say. If you just want to go to the movies and laugh, go see this movie. If you watched the first movie and you liked the first movie, go see this movie. I have a piece of advice for you if you're like me, and I fall into the third category. The third category is, this movie was like comedy religion, almost. It's up there with Spaceballs. As far as comedy movies go, to me, Spaceballs and Clerks are religion. So it's up there with those. If you're like me and that movie hit you at just the right time, in just the right place, as just the perfect comedy movie at that time, my advice for you is, go see the movie and temper your expectations by about 20%. If you're the kind of person that's capable of doing that, I think you're going to have a good time with the movie. Maybe a little bit better of a time than I had with it, because I'm speaking as someone who didn't do that. I went in with no tempering of expectations, and I got a movie that was good. It was funny. It was funny and good. So I feel compelled before I end the review to ask myself, well, okay, what would have made you give this movie the business? Because again, I'm jonesing so hard to give this movie the business. If that movie would have been 10 minutes longer, and that whole 10 minutes was dedicated to the Super Troopers messing with people in pullovers, just on the highway, 10 more minutes of that, I'd have given the movie the business, because that to me is the core of what Super Troopers comedy is. I'd have taken a movie that was 10 minutes longer if that whole 10 minutes was just that. That movie I would have given the business, for sure. So there you go, folks. Broken Lizard's Super Troopers 2. I have to say, It's a pretty good it's a strong Have you seen the movie? What do you think of it? That's the review for Super Troopers 2. That's it for me this time around. We will see you next time for the next movie review. Hopefully, see you at the movies. And, of course, we know what the big movie is that's coming out this weekend. And stay tuned for that one.